Hey man, talk to me real quick, bro.
What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? It's your man Sean Torrey, the host of the UnconQuerable Because We Believe show. It's an honor to be here. We are here about to set episode 3, Systematic Barriers. And UnconQuerable, baby, you gotta believe in this, yo. You see that feather? That's a feather pen, so that you can write your story. That's a quill, so that you can paint your own canvas. Bucko. Ladies and gentlemen, we are back, man. It's your man Sean Torrey with the UnconQuerable Because We Believe the show. Thank you so much for everyone that are here today. First of all, give a round of applause for yourselves, for those who's here. Okay, we have some city, local government powerhouses in the house today that I'm just honored to have here. So I wanted to start with this woman to the right. We have Miss Cecelia González. I'll allow her to introduce herself, though.
Hi, everyone. My name is Cecelia González, and I represent Assembly District 16 in the Nevada Legislature. When I'm not in the Nevada Legislature, I'm also a full-time PhD student at UNLV in multicultural education.
Yes, in class with me. And then to this great brother to my right is my frat brother, the chapter president of our local chapter of Theta Pi Lambda chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, Athar. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hey everyone, Athar Haseebullah. I'm an attorney here. I'm a product of Las Vegas, the local president for the Vegas Alphas. I'm also the executive director for the ACLU of Nevada, and I was the first person of color appointed to that position in January of 2021.
Snap.
I was about to say, right. He said it so smooth. For the culture.
When he said I'm a product of Las Vegas, I was like, damn, I missed my shot to talk about how I'm also a product of Las Vegas.
And last but not least, right? Because first of all, we got this too many powerhouses. I need to do something better with my life. So we have the last powerhouse in the house, Miss Mingo. Could you please introduce yourself?
Hi everybody, I'm Dinisha Mingo. I'm the owner of Mingo Health Solutions, known as MHS Behavioral Services, where we just celebrated our 5-year anniversary on Friday.
What are talking about?
And going forward, March 26th is in Clark County Mingo Health Solutions Day, so y'all make sure y'all celebrate with us. I'm also a Las Vegas native, a board member of our local Urban Chamber of Commerce, founder of Solutions of Change, a nonprofit, and go visit our website.
Can I just get snaps to each other?
You need to plug.
Can I get a snap?
MHS Behavioral Services.
So you got the website in there too?
I didn't get the website in.
Man, listen. Go ahead, drop the website on one time.
ACLUNV.org. Or the other ones, but not.
Yo, this is why I'm so happy to have y'all here. This is Number Family, and I'm thankful that y'all are here. So for those who are tuning in to this episode, this is episode 3, Systematical Barriers, right? And kind of where this whole UnconQuerable thing started. As Cecelia and I were getting ready for the program to start, I was like, okay, what am I gonna do? Everyone who knows me knows I do mentorship. So I thought about the UnconQuerable and how it came from Invictus, and I made my own definition for it, which is one who takes on structural, personal, economical, and systematical barriers and still becomes success regardless of what comes their way. And from that, I was like, all right, cool. I'm going to focus on Black men, and my dissertation topic is what factors of informal and formal mentorship are effective towards Black men in degree completion. So, as y'all know, I work for the College of Southern Nevada, which is an honor. And I've had episode 1 and 2, and now we're here on episode 3, right? And really, this space is for us to have a natural, organic conversation about what's going on out here. And we throw these terms out that people really don't know. And you're up at the legislative, right? You both are, and you're heavy in the mental health field. And we don't talk about systematical barriers enough. People hear the word, but they don't really understand what that means. So I wanted to ask y'all, right? The first question is, what's systematical barriers? Like, I've heard it all the time. People hear it all the time, but I don't think people really understand what that means. So can y'all really explain to the people and to us, like, what is systematical barriers?
I can let the academic go first.
Why am I labeled as the academic? Is he not an academic?
He's an academic too, but he can't answer right now.
I can't answer right now. You're right.
So I think that's a great question that you bring up, that people don't understand what systematical barriers are. And I would say it's because it's so insidious in our community, and that it's so, like, embedded that people don't really understand what's happening to them is not an outlier, right? They're not special in a way that I'm going through all these things. It's like, no, girl, it's like systematically set up for you to be this way, right? From housing discrimination to low income wage gap to our overall education system in general, right? Like, we literally tell children what zip codes they live in are only as good as what schools they can attend, right? And again, when we say systematic, it's all the systems working together: education, housing, the wage gap, our economy working together to keep low-income, poor people of color, primarily our low-income communities, at the bottom, right?
Okay.
And so when you say systematic, again, it's how the systems work together. So if that's me growing up in a low-income school, right, or a low-income area trying to get a good education, and then I go off to college, right, and then I'm like a first-generation college student who doesn't know how to navigate higher education, who takes on student loans because I either don't know or don't understand, or I'm also sold.
Speaking my life right now.
Right? Or I'm also sold this lie of take these loans out. You don't have to worry about the interest rate. I mean, at 18 years old, do you think I know what an interest rate was? Right? Like, and not having, being a first generation college student, you don't know those things. You don't know how predatory loans and education can be. And so then you go and try to, you've got your degree, you try to get on the market, you can't get a good job, or if you if you get a good job, you're not making as much as your white counterpart, right? 9 times out of 10, right? Let's call it out for what it is.
Right.
You try to get a home, you can't find a good rate, right? So it's all these different things, that systems that work together to keep us at the bottom.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
But thank you. Like,
I don't know if that explains
No,
it. You
that
know the
definitely
academic in me.
It definitely did.
I'd also add on though, like I think like when we look at the practical examples of systemic barriers that exist, right? I think a lot of times now the jargon's used because it's popular in politics, but when we look at the primary examples of it, and we even look at it from like a business sector setting, look at the way that cannabis has been treated historically, right? You penalize folks for petty possession for years and years. Then all of a sudden, 20 years later, states like Nevada are doling out dispensary licenses, and then you look at the number of black and brown business owners that received a license, and it's like nil, right? So kept out.
I'm like, how many
on
are
the back
there?
end?
Do you know?
No, like how many dispensaries or
Black owned, yeah.
I want to say
I think it's one.
There's one, right?
I thought it was two.
or three.
It's
Yeah,
2 or 3?
2 or 3.
In Nevada?
But like
Yeah,
of all
in
of them,
Nevada,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, it's
Right.
like 2 or 3 of like 30.
Yeah.
And there's a bunch of them now.
Yeah.
Like they're literally next door to each other.
Right.
And it's depending if you're in the city or in Clark County. Clark County approves more than the city.
But
So-
even on the back end of that, like figuring out how they dealt. Now they're talking about like, well, let's seal marijuana records. It's crazy to me that like over the course of 2 decades, you have a record for one thing, and then you have $1 million industry you have to crack into on another, right?
Yeah.
And then you look at other areas like banking, and we talk about redlining overall, and the concept of what redlining looks like to prevent people from actually owning homes.
Right.
And those are actual tangible examples. When we talk about systemic racism and systemic barriers that exist, I think a lot of those conversations get left out because they'll focus on what happens now. Are people receiving an exact opportunity right now that's the same? But it ignores everything from prior history, right? You have over
centuries, right? Like
centuries
Right.
of these practices that have existed that have thwarted the ability to create wealth, right? That's like owning a home was the very first mechanism for people to actually obtain wealth, and for the majority of people, that's how they actually are able to pass something on.
Right.
And so, when you preclude people from being able to enter into those spaces, you run into those types of barriers.
Like I used to think, or I would, when I travel, I would see all these like beautiful homes. And I'm approaching, the big 3-0, right? And so I'm like, dang, like I really need to buy a home. But it's really hard.
It is hard.
Like to qualify, to go through the process. And I see like sometimes on social media, some folks that I know that just have these like beautiful, extravagant homes. And for a long time, I used to think like, what am I doing wrong? And then I read this book actually. It's a very hard book to get through because it's just so like triggering. But it's called Color of Law, and it literally dives into the history of the housing and how discriminatory it was, how many redlining practices that are still even used today, right? And this isn't even talking about qualifying for a loan, right? And so now I felt like guilty, maybe like I should be more established, right? I have all these degrees, I should have a really good paying job. but I also know that systematically it was set up for me to be this way. Systematically it was set up for, you know, certain demographics of people to be able to have access to those things where people that look and come up from my background aren't, right? And so I had to be like, wait, this is not a me thing. This is like a systematic thing that has existed for like decades.
And I think it's important to add to that, like, how these systematic barriers impact mindset.
Right.
Because when you have these generational cycles of things where you haven't seen it or hasn't seemed attainable, and you become a first generation person who's now trying to climb out, think about myself and all the things I was dealing with in my household due to systematic barriers, and the fact that I was even able to graduate top 20% of my class and be as resilient as I was, but like, why didn't I go to a top-notch college and things like that? But I didn't know about, you know, scholarships or things. Even though I was in this environment, I just didn't have the capacity to do it. I didn't have anyone holding my hand.
SAT
Access.
Right. And then I got peers, and the only reason I graduated top 20% is because these other ones were retaking classes, you know, to get higher GPAs and things like that. And I'm just like lucky that I got offered this honor scholarship because there was just so much I didn't know. And like you said, we feel like, why haven't I accomplished this? And I remember I've lived on my own since I was 18. I would have loved to live at home, but it just wasn't possible. One of my best friend is a Nigerian. And I remember us being in like our mid-20s, all of us Americans, teasing her about living with her parents, right? Because
really
living on your own was independent. But here I was making 3 and 4 times as much money as she was, but had no assets, right? I couldn't save because I was living on my own, and those are the effects of systematic barriers and the mindset behind it, and then still having to have all these other responsibilities in regard to it. It's like, it just makes no sense. So she didn't move out until she was 28, but guess what? Her parents had her on their car insurance because they owned their home. So all she was paying was for really low car insurance, first of all, and cell phones. And she had it made, and I would tell her privately, like, girl, you better keep saving because we are suffering, we're in poverty, we can't attain, and you have all these successes seemingly on the outward, but we are not able to build because of the systematic barriers. And so it really impacts your mindset and then your confidence. And then it can continue to cycle up. I mean, I
would even say like the saving part, right? Like financial literacy and financial education. Like me having $10,000 in my savings account does nothing for me financially, right? Like it's actually one of the worst places for your money to be is a bank savings account that makes like 15 cents on interest a year, right? But who is telling us and teaching our communities how to invest, how to put our money? I mean, it's a risk, right? But even like you were saying, your friends, right? Like I have friends that own like homes and properties, and they rent them out, and it's extra income.
Multiple properties.
And I'm like, where do you even get this information, right?
The easiest thing to ever get done was to get a student loan. Like it took me 30 seconds to get a student loan. You click 3 boxes and you got like $20,000 in your account for the semester, but they don't tell you about interest. So it's another way. I mean, I think more than anything at this point now, it's starting to become generational, right? Like, why is it that we did everything that we were told to do? We took out student loans. We went to school. We went to graduate school. We went to professional school. We took out the loans to get there and get that education that we were told to go get for years and years. We continue to pay our loans every month, and yet we owe more based on interest that we end up taking out than we ever got before.
And then they tell you, oh, sorry, well, yeah, but you can't qualify for a house because your debt to income ratio doesn't. Okay,
but get this though, I qualify.
It's crazy.
I qualify for a $1,500 rent, but you're telling me I don't qualify for a $700 mortgage?
Exactly.
But I pay my $1,500 rent every month. My little raggedy bedroom
and all these utilities.
And my car note, and my insurance, and my health insurance, but I can't qualify for a $700 mortgage.
And let me tell you,
it does not. It's systematically rigged for me to not be able to obtain that.
And I think that the more achievements we have, right? Sometimes I can honestly say I didn't even think I was impacted by systematic barriers, right? I'm the one.
That's my next question.
I'm the one who made it out, right? So I never felt like my skin color or anything because I had my academics and all these other achievements. And it did not take until I got into business, now this other level, that I started realizing, oh no, Dinisha, you're impacted by this too. Why can't you get a business loan? When I think of things that happened in COVID, I have friends who have real estate companies and other things because their family is so their history is so deep, right? Their connections, their relationships are so deep that the same day they apply for the SBA loan and the PPP loan, they got money deposited. And we were waiting weeks and weeks. White people, right? They got money deposited the same day.
Call it out, girl. Call it out.
And why did it take for a pandemic to happen for me to even be able to get a loan? I've been trying to get a loan for 4 years prior to that in business. And so that's when I started realizing, oh no, you are impacted by this too. You thought you were different. You thought you made it out, and then you were cool with still, right, trying to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps and making it and working hard, because that's what we can talk. Just work hard, and you just don't realize how deep it is and how much impact and how ignorant we are to it, because we just don't know. We don't see it, and we're not having those conversations.
Look at how they pulled the wool over people's eyes too. Like, there's no money to fix anything. But magically, the airlines are struggling, right?
Yeah,
and cruises are struggling, and all of a sudden, and credit companies are struggling, and all of a sudden,
we all get 3 stimulus checks.
That's all.
There's trillions of dollars now available to be able to, like, they're just printing money at this point, right?
Yep.
But whenever anybody else needed it for something in advance, that probably could have thwarted things like this from happening in the first place. If you actually had a real economic system that enabled people to do well versus just feeding the top 1% over and over and over.
I want to touch on that. Yep.
You know, Jeff Bezos has more of a net worth.
Oh, I got a question for you.
I just got
I think
30 seconds something to add to
his
that.
income, if I remember correctly, his income exceeds the GDP for countries like Bangladesh.
Oh.
Yeah, his income could
That's insane.
And world hunger is insane, right? Like literally. And then you pay your workers almost nothing, not a livable wage, not affordable healthcare, which is like the least as a multi-billion person.
How do your workers end up on public assistance and have to get Medicaid, but you're worth
3 jobs,
billions of dollars?
right?
Don't make sense.
Like,
don't make sense. What were you gonna say? Because I got a question right after you. Because it pertains to something you said. But go ahead. What's your question?
Well, when he talks about this thing, Asha Jones, shout out Asha. She was at my anniversary, and I completely forgot. She made a statement. I was like, I interned with her in high school at the Congresswoman Berkeley's office, and she was like, "You were a Republican then," and not that I was, but I saw how the system was impacting my family, right? Living on public assistance and all. And I remember being like young and having a boyfriend, and then we lived in the ghetto, and one of our neighbors was like, y'all need to have some kids because we big eating, right? We're getting food stamps, we're getting all these things. And so me as a single woman, I remember I've never been unemployed since I was 15.
Right.
I lost my job, and I was making probably like $12 an hour at the time. Tried to apply for food stamps, but because I had made $600 already that month, I wasn't eligible. And so, I mean, these are the things when we talk about that keeps us down. And so it makes it so hard to keep pushing, and these systematic barriers are what continue to create these systematic barriers, because sometimes you just get to the point where you're like, forget it. It's too hard to try to do something on my own. I'm working so much harder for so much less, and it makes it so much easier just to be like, whatever. Let me just chill. Let me chill and collect this unemployment. Let me chill and collect this welfare check over. And I hated that growing up. So I think that's why Asha and my family saw me as Republican. I was like, we gotta get out of this.
Right.
There has to be something more, but the mindset needed to change.
We saw you at the rallies.
I understand it now, right? I'm not.
You don't got a lot to kick it.
I understand it now, but I'm not. But those are the things.
She was ducking and hiding like,
Right. Yo. Shifts off the camera.
You get that
no,
on
but
camera?
I will say, okay, so like,
but it was what I was preaching. Like, this is not okay, y'all.
Right.
Like the other night, so Friday night, I had just gotten back in, right? And I had my graduate assistant stuff to do still. I had to like pack all these packages and whatnot or whatever. And I finished about 3 a.m. And literally as I'm stepping out of the garage, I trip over a box of like wood for the fireplace. And I'm just like sitting there and I'm like, oh my God, like when do I just get to not struggle anymore? When do I have to not work till 3 a.m.? When do I have to not like be 3 people at once all day,
We
every
were
day,
supposed
like,
to have
right?
made it by now. We're 30. We 30.
What if you stop having your avocado toast every day?
I deserve some avocado toast, okay? But, you know, like, I just had that question of, like, when.
Yes.
And then even talking to my best friend, because we're both, she's getting ready to start her doc program, too. And I'm just like, you know, we have that real conversation. I was telling Athar, I'm thinking of getting back ready to go back into the classroom this fall because it's just not affordable. It's unsustainable. Even as a GA student, I couldn't imagine if I had like a family I had to take care of because the stipend is so low a month, and the trade-off is like your schools pay for it.
And then you say, oh, you can't work during it, but
right, like, and so it's so much, and then
makes no
even like
sense.
being a legislator, right? Like a lot, like I'm sure people in my family do look at me like, oh, she made it, and I'm like, first of all, do you know what legislators make in this state?
You know what's also crazy too? Like when we compare Nevada to other places, and I hate to say this, but like when I was living in New York, I remember applying for an apartment, and they told me I was low income because I made less than $160,000 per year.
Come on.
So I was kind of like laughing, like, wait, what? Like that's like your threshold.
That's your threshold in New York.
Like to me, that means you made it.
Bucko.
You know?
But having those real conversations of like when, like I've only made this much amount of money every year, right? Like when do I get to be like, oh, 50, 60,000? That's nice. Like I've been making 30,000 a year, right? And so being at the legislature, it's very like, I would say systematic barriers have been very real to me because I am so different in the sense of like my background, right? I'm first of all, a woman of color. Like, let's start there. I'm a queer woman of color, right? But I'm also a person who has no like wealth, generational wealth that has kept me or carried me through times, right? Like I'm out here on my own. I fundraised literally as much money as I could during a pandemic through people that I just knew, right? I didn't have all this like access to these like high donors. And so just my experience in being up there, and even like for example, we get a housing stipend, right, to help us while we're up in Carson because you have to live there and you have to maintain your residency, right, which can be very difficult. It's systematically created for people to be in those positions that have generational wealth, that have generational knowledge of this overall system, right? And so here I am running around the legislature my first like week or two. Hey, when am I gonna get this like housing voucher? When am I gonna get this like refund for X, Y, and Z, right? And everyone's like looking at me like, why do you care? Right? Like why do you care? Like it'll, I don't know, it shows up in your bank. One of the folks, one of the other my colleagues was like, I don't know, it just shows up in your bank account. Like just keep checking. And I'm like, okay, first of all, I'm counting every single dollar that I have. I have this amount in my, savings account. I have this amount in my campaign account. I have this amount in my like everyday account, right? I'm maintaining residency like down here, right? And so it just was like a reality to me of like, oh yeah, we're like all in different tax brackets here.
One really good point, I think, to comment on that real quick, is that like, I think, and there's this perception with government, the response is like, well, if you don't have it, just don't run. And that's exactly what the problem is.
Right.
You have too many people that are too disconnected.
Man.
Like, you and I have talked about this a bunch. We've all been at service events for years. You run into the same crowds at the same events. So now I run in, obviously, like as a certain number of us who are politicos or contributors and things like that, like you end up having conversations with folks, and the first thing they say is, oh, I really want to run for office because I love the community, but we've never seen you at an event.
Never.
You have no affiliation.
Never heard your name.
We don't know anything about anything.
Never heard your name.
And so as a result, we end up in situations where we're trying to actually move things forward, but we run into almost, it's unfortunate because it's created imposter syndrome in those that actually deserve to be in office, and it's created imposters for those that are in office that pretend to be community advocates.
So, this is getting heavy, and I love it. Because my next question, and we kind of drifted a little bit from it because it was your standpoint on the fact of people who don't see it, and that's not even just us, folks who grew up to working class, to middle class, to working middle class. Even folks who are that top 2%, they don't see it. So why is it, and my next question is, why is it difficult for people to see how systematic barriers affect their everyday life? Why is it so difficult?
Well, I think there's two types of difficultness, right? There's the difficultness of people who don't see it because they're privileged, right? Like they're at the top, they don't worry about things like unemployment and food stamps and public assistance, and like they've never had that experience.
Why
and
see
then,
the world?
Right.
When you got the beach, right? Frank
Like,
Ocean.
okay, and then there's the other people that are in it and still can't see it, I think because they may be unknowledgeable or they don't. It's like really interesting, but I see these like two different types of people who find it difficult to believe that systematic like barriers.
Yeah,
exist,
also
right?
like people are duped into thinking
Yep.
that they're in a place that they're not.
Yeah.
Yep.
Like, my guy, you work for Amazon. You're not Jeff Bezos. You might be a manager today, but you might be unemployed tomorrow. And so, like, as a result, the
You
same
probably
people
will
they
be
have,
unemployed
right,
tomorrow.
the people who are most protective of these systemic
Yeah.
barriers
Yeah.
are often the ones that are directly impacted. We often talk about, like, one of the large segments of basis for folks like Trump. And look, I don't care if someone's a Democrat or Republican, but I'll blast Trump until the day I die.
Same.
Because he was
Facts.
the worst president and the most corrupt and unethical person and leader in American history, right? But the folks that were advocating for him, many of those weren't well-to-do folks. He had people convinced that that's my ally in office. He really cares. And he's writing tax policy that literally
That went
cripples
against
them.
you.
Yeah.
Cripples them. It's not going to help them.
But
But
that's
then
the point
and
of
that's
policy
what-
in general too,
I
right?
think that's what keeps us, right? For those of us who, are not that 2%, it's because we are unaware, right? We grew up in this, right?
Right.
The allegory of chaos. All I know is what I see, what's in front of me. This seems natural. I wasn't having these conversations about politics in my
Girl.
household because we just didn't know.
Exactly.
Right.
I don't know
Exactly.
how, financial systematic barriers are impacting me. I have family members who think because I try to get them life insurance that I'm trying to kill them. right? I'm telling you, it's sad.
Life insurance.
It's
You're right
sad.
though.
It's
But you're
sad
right
though.
though.
So we just literally don't know. And so then for those of us who are making it out,
Yeah.
there's still so much we're ignorant to because we don't have these conversations, and there's so much to have to pick through. Is so much information
Right.
to have to understand when it's not exposed to you. You're not aware.
Yep.
So this is
And-
just natural. That's why.
And social media is convinced everyone they're an expert on everything.
Oh God!
Right? Like,
Instagram models.
an expert on everything.
Everything.
Like, oh, there's a pandemic coming up. Well, it just so happens I was on Facebook and I'm an epidemiologist. They're not.
You said that to me.
They're not actually experts, but on things like finance, I think it's become really pervasive. Like, I saw this stuff about, the best way around it, go file an LLC, do X, Y. That's not even real.
That's not-
Like, the
No.
stuff that was being shared was fake.
I have an LLC. It don't work.
It
my
does
friend.
not work. But they also, there's this conception that, everyone's going to be able to follow suit on everything. And then the next thing you know, everyone's selling, particularly in our generation, they're pushing pyramid schemes and then wondering why things aren't going to work. Like, we should probably be referred to as the pyramid scheme generation. Because
We're
it's
just
one
the scheme
after
generation.
another.
Just can't do it.
Okay, like,
Scheme
let's
generation.
start with student loans though. Literally, during the campaign trail in 2020,
Right.
so many candidates were talking about student loan forgiveness, and a lot of the questions were like, what would happen if you got your student loans taken away, right? I'd be like, wow, I'd have a life. I'd have a family. I'd be able to buy a home. Because here I am making $900 payments a month for the next 20 years to barely tap into interest that I paid, right? Like, we were sold a lie. And I want to touch back on what you said about there's so much that we don't know. And I think when it comes to systematic barriers and how it impacts people is that it's so hidden in the details, right? That we literally think we've been sold the lie. Well, pull up yourself by your bootstraps and you'll just make it, right? This figmentation of, I don't even know if that's a word, I probably just made that up, of the American dream, right?
Yep.
Of how if you just work hard, you'll make it. No,
That's not
work
true.
hard for who, where, and what. Because it's not people like me, right? And so I just want to touch on that of how hidden it is, because I also find that once you know, you can't unknow. So sometimes, right, we experience things and we're like, dang, that was really rough. Or one time I was up for a job and I ended up not getting this position, and I was like, wow, that really sucks. I guess I just have to work harder next time. And everyone around me is like, Cecelia, you totally just had a white woman select a white woman over this I wouldn't say most intelligent, but this woman of color, right, who's been literally at the center for years doing volunteer work. How do you not see that? And I was like, oh,
we all have the head nod afterwards, like,
Right.
And
now
it's just
you-
a nod after.
That's exactly what's happening to me.
I was like, oh shit.
And now you look
like-
back, and then I'm like kind of how I said I didn't realize, right, that because I thought I was above it. I didn't think it was impacting
It's
me.
above me now.
Right. And I
Dog.
look back and I think of things. I remember being in high school and talking to my guidance counselor. he knew I was set on being an attorney at the time. So that's graduate school, right?
Right.
And so I'm like, well, I really want to major in psychology in my undergrad because I love it. He's like, well, you should just do business because in order to do psychology, in order to make money in psychology, you need to have a graduate degree, at least a master's level. So told me to major in business, right? I switched my major my first semester. I thought he was just ignorant. It dawned on me just 3 years ago. You didn't think that I was even going to get to graduate school, although my plan was to go to law school.
Right.
So you're telling me to major in something that's going to be general versus follow my passion because you didn't even, and so that's the guidance. You didn't think I was going to make it that far, let alone, like I told you, I graduated with 4.3 GPA.
Whoa,
without retaking it. No, but I'm saying, right, in a school, in a tech school, 60% Asian, right, 60% male.
Ooh.
I remember I majored in the law, I was in the law program, but I remember being in high calculus, like even my science, and not just social studies and English. I was in the high science class, the high science and math classes, right? One of two black people, one of two girls.
Talk to him.
And I remember, like, now that I think back and I think of the things my teachers said, but I got so accustomed to that environment that I was just blocking them out, right? But there were so many things where people were not supporting me or holding my hand or showing me. And I just didn't know. But even then, I thought that I was different. I remember watching Hidden Figures and making a post like, damn, I'm a hidden figure, right? You're a hidden figure. You're a hidden figure. And somebody was like, you're being disrespectful to these women who have done this amazing thing with NASA. But I'm like, no, that should be how we feel about ourselves and our DNA. But again, this systematic mindset keeps us from being able to even think that we're that great and recognize those opportunities and those things that we've done to be set apart. And then again, when you don't get the opportunity, all you do is say, well, dang, I must have done something wrong.
Right.
I need to work a little bit harder.
Yeah.
But even being in this environment that we should not have been in, we were still being oppressed because those who knew that you're special, you can make it, you're going to be the one to make change for the rest of them. They're doing in insidious, right, sneaky ways to still keep you down so that you don't do it. Anyways, I
think your story actually really touches the last question that you had about education.
I'm actually ready to ask you.
Look, I was getting ready to say that's
do you want to ask
National
it
Convention speech 2024. She's ready to go, folks.
I was actually getting up for this.
Bottom though, I'm not a Republican. I am not a Republican.
I am not.
By the way, for the viewers, I don't care which way you go.
We don't care.
We don't care.
But your future leader is here.
If you want Trump,
I want my people to not be okay with the system that's been set in place to keep them oppressed and down and ignorant and in poverty.
Yeah.
And I would say education is a huge part of that, and the way that it was created and the way of the history of it. Like I touched on earlier, you have such a variety of different schools in one school district. You have one of the poorest schools and one of the most funded schools, right? And you talk about academic outcomes and this idea of an achievement gap, because I personally don't believe it's an achievement gap, right? I feel that term places the blame on students when students actually aren't given resources and academic attention to succeed, right? There's no achievement gap. Right. There is a funding gap, right? Yes. But education, also in that story that you talked about, right? I'm not against people doing things good for the community, but things like trade schools and right, well, what communities are you going in and telling that they should go and be a tradesman versus what communities are you going in and telling you could be the next president of the United States, right? And so even in your story of how, you talked about how, you had counselors and people tell you that, oh, well, instead of doing this thing that you actually want to do and go and be, I know you're not going to make it, so you should do this other thing. Like, why do we put limits on people, on students, on young children? We should be telling them that they could be anything, right? When I was an elementary school student, I literally thought I could be an astronaut. Yes. Granted, I definitely did not become an astronaut, okay? I definitely did not become an astronaut. But when I was in high school, my dream was to become a U.S. Supreme Court justice, right? Those were like my aspirations as a high school young girl in the environment, education access that I had. And I just wonder, like, where did we lose that, right? Like, where did we lose that you can follow your dreams and be what you want?
Like, part of it too is I even wonder if it's
jaded.
I wonder if it's intentional or just obliviousness by some folks. And the reason why I say that is, like, we have to remember the generation that taught us in school was used to potentially not going to college.
Right.
Yep.
They worked at Blockbuster for 20 years,
Yep.
or like they would be like, oh, I'll just go get a job at Sam Goody. You know,
It
all
would be
of these-
it would have cool salaries.
Cool
It'd be
salary,
cool because
valet used to be
Exactly.
solid. If you were a dealer in the casino, that was like the big push
It was
for
a
all
big
of us
push.
who grew up here. Like, oh,
I would
you're
say
good,
here
you know?
especially, right?
Yeah.
More of my peers make more on the strip than I do with
Yes.
2-3
Come
degrees.
on.
Okay?
Degrees.
So what is the incentive
Driving
when you
Audis.
have right? Like what is the incentive of higher education
Right.
when you have industries that
Right.
take you, prime you, and that's what you're doing? You turn around and you're 40 years old in an industry that doesn't pay you adequate health care, right?
Right.
Doesn't give you time off, doesn't have sick paid leave, right? Like
Well, there's
so-
also like there's a shrinking availability of industries.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
like this whole notion that all of these jobs are going to be permanently available and you just
No.
work hard, they're gone.
They're gone.
Like they're dated. Retail shops. I mean, we look. You can drive down the street and see what used to be a Blockbuster,
Yeah.
right? Or used to
Yep.
be a Pizza Hut dine-in.
Almost
Franchises are
almost
pretty much
what's
gone
it?
now,
Movie
so-
theaters about to be gone.
Yeah.
It's
next.
because Amazon has taken over the world.
Taken over.
I don't know if you guys know this.
We definitely did.
Well, look, I can't knock it too much because I still
I do
use
too.
it.
I mean,
Unfortunately,
because we've been
Amazon.
forced to use it, right?
Yeah.
Like, what is the alternative? What is the option?
And there are
we're forced
opportunities there
into
in
this
terms of, like-
systematic things, right? Where, you know, for example, access, right? So you said valet
Access.
is going out. We've been really turning to this like technological world. You no longer see people taking your order even at like a McDonald's. It's
Yeah.
a screen,
It's
right?
screen, yep.
So how are we supposed to advance and succeed when we've been told not to get our educations
Yep.
because you can, you know, go to this school and do, and I'm not knocking trade schools by any mean, like
Right,
it's
right.
definitely hard work
It's
to
the
get through.
messaging
Like,
about
it's the
which
messaging
kids.
Which kids?
on
Yeah,
which
and that's the
kids.
problem.
And
It's
who
who
can be,
you're- who
and then
you're
what to
serving.
do with it, right?
Yes.
I could
Exactly.
still be a masterful at this trade, and I don't want to sit here and say that, hey, everybody needs a desire to be rich, but we need to be able to be comfortable, to be able to pass down, right, finances to our next generations, to make sure they have homes and other opportunities to still continue to build wealth, whatever that looks like. But if you're going to go to a trade school, still let me know my opportunities with this skill as a trade
Exactly.
person.
Okay.
If that is owning my own business with it, not that that has to be the case, but make sure I'm aware of that opportunity, because I mean, you need people to work for you. But you know, because like you said, which kids, and let them know so that that opportunity
Yeah.
is there so they can go for it, and then ensuring that they have the proper supports in place to leverage it and optimize it.
But even this idea of like which kids, right? So like, sure, maybe I failed a class, maybe I flunked out of my undergrad. That still doesn't put this like ultimate narrative of what I can or can't be, right?
Right.
I was a straight A student. I also received a 4.2 when I graduated honors in my high school, and when I got to college, okay,
That was
when,
you?
Nah, wait me. I was
Okay.
I was a 3-4.
Wait,
Nowhere near
I was a 3-4.
3.2.
Don't even
I
worry
was
about
in
one
the top,
now.
you know, 10%
Don't
of my, you know, like I was also like top 10% of my class, right? I was winning awards in high school.
She was in Key Club for sure.
And definitely was in Key Club in high school. I was in every club, I think, in high school in sports, but also
We were trying to make it out. That's
Make
what
it
we were
out,
we were
right.
told this, you know, to
I'm
do
sure
it.
she has a National Honor Society.
But wait, let me finish though. Let me finish though.
Best.
Right, I graduated high school with a 4.2 GPA. I have scholarships. I think my first like 2 years of college were 100% funded. Right, I get to college and
Did
I
you go to the UNLV?
I went to UNLV and I completely flunk. Okay, I have no resources of transition from like high school to college. I'm managing 2 like part-time jobs to try to afford to just like feed myself, right? And let alone talking about rent or a car. I think my first year I didn't even have a car. I was trying to save for a car to
Right.
get to and from school. My parents were still dropping me off,
on.
right? Like, and I failed. I think I graduated my undergraduate with like a barely 2.9 GPA.
Wow.
Right? But I'm ambitious, and I knew that it wasn't the end, and I knew that I wanted to continue higher education. And I actually, the reason why I had such a low GPA was because I started college as a pre-professional biology thinking I was going to go to med school, and the sciences were like, ooh girl, we need to pump the brakes
Was
here.
that when you would be an astronaut?
I actually wanted to be a neurosurgeon,
Oh,
right?
okay,
And so I'm
salute.
doing all these things that I'm told that I need to do, and I'm like, it's just not working. These science classes are like really hard. I can't study for literally 20 out of 24 hours a day, right? Switched my major a couple times. I end up graduating, and I apply to graduate school.
See, salute.
I don't get into any graduate school, right? Surprise, with a 2.9 GPA, right? But again, I didn't let that be the end for me, and I think I was also super lucky, and we could also talk about mentorship. Like, I had a mentor in the sociology department that was like, this is not the end for you. You are freaking brilliant. Like, this is what we put together a plan. I applied again, and I got into, not only did I get into all the programs that I applied to, but I also got in with 100% funding, right? Still not enough because you have to like make your life school, right? So I still had to take out loans anyway because I had to survive. I had a car note. I had to pay my rent, right? I'm making this stipend at school that's like $1,200 a month. Like, it's totally not livable. But the moral of the story is that if I believed everyone that told me not to do it, I would not be in my PhD program. If I believed everyone told me that I wouldn't make a successful office run, I wouldn't be an assemblywoman today. If I believed all the lies that society told me that I couldn't do, I would not be sitting here as a legislator and a PhD student, right? And so I also think that we need to uplift.
Yes. Flex on.
I'm not the only one.
You ain't the only one.
But, you know, I am going to flex for a second. And we have this notion that we shouldn't flex, right? People
I was just talking about
we
this
have
on the
this
last
notion
episode.
that we need
I'm
to
sorry,
be
go ahead.
humble,
Go
right?
ahead.
Yeah, I worked my butt off to be
man.
where I'm at.
You see what I posted yesterday?
It is going to
Yeah.
be Dr.
But this is
González
the
to
thing.
everyone, right?
They try to tell you that, you know, insecurity is humility and confidence and arrogance. And confidence is arrogance, and that's not true.
That's not true.
You can be confident
Yes.
and humble. They just get mad because they're
They don't.
comparing themselves to you. Like, somebody told me, "Oh, you think you something, huh?" I'm like, "I do," and clearly
I
so
am
do you.
something.
Yeah.
But-
Why not?
Why not?
Why is this not okay?
Right.
But I mean, again, they don't want your mind.
I used to get told that a lot. Like,
and I'm like, I'm even thinking about
you're
you.
arrogant.
Right?
You're arrogant. And I'm like, I didn't even say anything.
I didn't say nothing. But that's what I'm saying. I'm like, why me being sure of myself is a problem for you? Fix whatever you need to do and get that on your
Or
own,
me
player.
speaking.
Exactly.
English.
Okay,
And knowing
let's
how to
talk
code
about
switch.
that.
I gotta hit her. Because we gotta get this last
Sorry,
question.
okay.
We gotta get this last question. We gotta get this last
It's going to be
question.
your extended episode.
Hey, we gonna. Hey, I'm
It's a
just serious. We
series.
gonna come back.
Season 1.
See, this is season 1.
Y'all, welcome back.
We gonna come back. We gonna come back. But this picks on what you were saying, right? And actually, because you talked about education and what we were taught, right? And this is a heavy question. But do y'all feel the education system is enabling systematical barriers?
Absolutely. That's
Yeah.
not even a question. Absolutely.
Like, there's data to show that.
Yeah.
Right,
I mean, even
exactly.
if we took quantitative out, which we don't need to because the
Right.
numbers speak for themselves, right?
Right.
But we look at just qualitative, and the low expectations they set
Come
for
on.
black and brown kids to say that same conversation we were just having, where we're talking about trade schools. Are you going to have the same conversation with students in predominantly affluent white schools about trade schools
Yep.
as you are?
No, they're
with
not.
black-
They're
no,
talking
of
about
course not.
let me-
But then we look at the numbers, and even if we talk about systemic issues there, why is it that when you look at things like discretionary suspensions and expulsions,
Come on.
black students are 7 times more likely to receive a discretionary suspension or expulsion than their white counterparts?
Yep.
So
Mhm.
we
And
already
even the
know it
diagnosing
is.
of learning disabilities
Yep.
or you know,
Yep.
behavioral issues and IEPs and
Yep.
504 plans, and you're putting sometimes kids who have certain behaviors because you don't like them or you're not used to them, and putting them in actual special ed classes with people who actually have cognitive delays. So now they're in these. I used to hate proficiencies, even though I
Me
passed
too.
all mine. Right, because what happens,
too.
I've seen it happen from the behavioral health aspect. Now you got this kid who just having some behavioral problems, or maybe he just got a lot of energy and you don't like it, or doesn't have the tools to stay on task, whatever that is, and then you put him in an actual special ed class where has no standards, right, of learning, of achievement, and now you're going through this. And socially, right, he's getting a whole bunch of other issues now because he's in an inappropriate classroom setting. Then you get to high school and you've never had to learn, you've never had to achieve, and you've never had to do anything. And then it's like, oh, well, if you can't pass high school or graduate and pass these proficiency tests, which they've done away with them. But that's just one example of the way the educational system enables us from a variety of different ways. I grew up in North Las Vegas, and I went to ATEC. Like I said, it is a nationally ranked high school, even though it's in Nevada and it's a magnet school. I was always in GATE. I was always in accelerated classes and everything all throughout elementary and middle school. My freshman year of high school was the hardest year of school in my life. And I saw the disparity between what we were being taught, even in K with the other white kids, right out of my, even in accelerated classes, and then this expectation to achieve and technology I didn't have access to.
That's like in college.
I didn't have a computer at home, and I got a C in computer fundamentals because I couldn't type at a certain thing, and I'm like, I don't even have a computer, but I started the quarter with an F. So are you gonna grade me on my progress, or but and then just even socially, in the level of expectation, the way that things were taught, but then the topics that were talked about in class, we weren't having those current events and things like that. So I felt like so out of place. I felt stupid for the first time in my life. I wanted to quit because I was like, I could go to my local high school and be valedictorian sleeping, right?
Right.
But because like you, I'm ambitious and I'm resilient. And even with all of that, I was able to overcome it and do well. But I can't forget how hard that was and how that showed me this disparity in our school system in our predominantly minority neighborhoods, because it should not have been so.
Right. And that's a great question when we talk about like English language learners. We treat them like they're stupid. We treat them like they don't know how to do things. When it's that not only are they in an academic setting learning how to be students and all these other curriculars, but they're also learning an entirely new language.
They speak freaking 2 languages. I don't even know the
I don't know how stupid they are.
Right, this notion that they're not as smart, like they speak 2, not 1. 2.
And
like,
so I,
math,
growing up for me, English was very difficult because, my mother was a single mom.
I gotta get you.
I don't speak Spanish.
Was Spanish your first language though?
No, Thai was my first language. So I'm Mexican and Thai.
Okay.
I don't speak Spanish, which we could talk about identity and that in a whole nother conversation. But growing up was very difficult because I had my family that immigrated from Thailand that only knew how to speak and do things in Thai. And so I remember my grandma, she would tell me, math is the only subject that I can help you in because it's streamlined across all countries, right? And even now, as a 30-year-old PhD doc student, I still look up words on how to say them phonetically before I speak, whether I'm in like committee at work or if I'm about to give a speech or have this conversation, because there are still words that I don't know how to pronounce, and that feeling that like makes me feel stupid because I say, for example, municipal. The county municipal level, right? I still can't say that, right? And at work, that's a word.
You're a legislator, right?
At work, we say that word often, I would say.
I'm not saying
but there's just, right? And then in English, too, you have words that are like spelled one way, but you don't say like a K and an A, and you're just like, what?
It's
like,
so crazy,
right?
too, like when you think about it, because those kids, the same ones that like society views as like, oh, they're ELL, blah, blah, blah. Like, not only are they speaking 2 languages, a lot of these kids, like many of us, are translating for their parents
all the
at
documents,
home. Like, they're literally serving as interpreters
So think of all
children.
the rest of that weight and pressure, right, on them. And they're brilliant.
I had someone tell me, I'm putting translator on my transcript because I literally, or CV, sorry. They're like, I'm putting translator on my CV because the last 20 years I have translated every legal document, every medical appointment for my parents. Like, I am a translator. And I was like, heck yeah, you are.
One of the things I think that comes out of that too that we sometimes forget about, and actually it's going to be a disservice to those that have criticized folks for this long, because when you have that thick shell and thick skin afterwards where you can kind of go through it, but you've also continued to heighten your critical thinking skills year after year because you've had to switch between languages, or even code switch, or you've had to kind of persevere through different things. Like, the dynamics are shifting in America, right? And I think that's when these concepts of political threats come up, and the breaking away from what the status quo has been and empowering communities that have not traditionally been empowered, it becomes a threat. So what do afterwards? They enact more policies to create more systemic barriers, right? They try to go after people who are relatively like low information, either voters or just individuals in general, to try to indoctrinate them with false messaging that, you can go out and do X, Y, and Z just as long as you follow, A, B, and C, and it's not true. Right? So they've pulled the wool over folks' eyes consistently. I think, when we talk about the value of education here, look at how society pays and compensates teachers. And even more substitutes.
That are predominantly women. It is a predominantly women field. If it was a predominantly male field, I'd wonder if the salaries were different.
It'll probably be a little higher, but I think based on the value system, they still probably wouldn't value, like, probably it would bump up, but where they should be in terms of like what they're actually getting, it really provides a lot of context for how our country as a whole sees education.
Right.
And substitute teachers,
We make nothing.
not only nothing, no health benefits.
No, nothing.
Like basic things like healthcare.
Our school district is so in need that you are a full-time teacher as a substitute teacher. You have opportunities to have contracts to be what we call long-term subs because we need that many teachers, right? It's not, oh, this teacher's going to take a week off or two to go on vacation and I'm going to step in. It's, we need you to actually teach this course for the next 5 years.
I think they've probably said it at this point. They cannot afford to provide everyone with benefits.
Nope.
And so they have the system where you got people sleeping in their car that are serving as substitute teachers because they can't actually, like, I remember last year the district ended up switching payment systems,
Right.
CCSD did, and it
was
was
a mess.
a month or 2 week delay in payment or a month delay in payment, something like that. And I remember hearing from someone who was like, I literally am sleeping in my car now. There's no reason
And
that
why
someone
is
like
that?
an educator
Right.
should be
When we
sleeping
live
in their car.
Yeah, and also
in a city where the casino industry, you know what I mean? Why is that? It shows
empty-
you.
But also with the system of education, we also, I think, as a society, don't want to address issues like mental health, right? We
Right.
don't want to address issues, and so we just
They
cram
cost money.
everything.
Anything
everything
that costs money is
but
like
we
a
cram
dead
everything into education, right? And so it really also begs the question. And I know, Sean, you and I have had this conversation. Like,
Right.
what is the role of the classroom?
It is.
Right?
What is it?
The hours of education were created so that our parents could go to work. And
Yes.
so is it to babysit us? Is it to mold us into what these folks for centuries in power have ideas of what we need to be and behave, right? Is it to teach us? And also, you know, I kind of lost my train of thought. I'm sorry.
No,
You're
okay.
good.
I
You're
was
good.
sorry. He was nodding his
Yeah.
head. And
Look,
the
I was
role of
saying
the classroom and the teacher,
overall,
right?
even
But
that-
as a teacher, this is what I was going
Yeah.
to say, and then you could go. As a teacher, I'm not just a teacher. I'm
Right.
their
You're a social
mother.
worker.
I'm their social worker. I'm their healthcare provider. I am their
Counselor.
therapist. I am their doctor, right?
Yep.
I am their person who's giving them
Yeah.
food depending on what grade you're teaching, right? Like, and so you are, you know, teachers are one of the toughest but most resilient, I think,
yes.
workforce
I
because
love 'em.
you're also doing it because you know you are changing the lives and leaders of tomorrow, right? And how do you bring in your pedagogy of the classroom with your background to provide multicultural education, to provide
that.
cultural competency, right?
Higher
Like,
ed vocab.
stop.
So,
No, but these are real conversations, right?
And this is why now y'all see why I created this space because we literally like and I'm so because man I want to keep this. There's gonna be a part 2. Just know that.
It has to be.
Just so y'all know, for season 2, because I do
We will
7
have a part
episode
2.
seasons, we will have a part 2. We got 5 minutes left. What are your last words to the people?
Ooh, that's a good one. I would honestly say it doesn't matter where you come from or
Keep it
who you
under-
are. You can be whatever you want to be, and to not let one person or one instance or experience deter you from doing whatever it is that you wanted. Like I said, I graduated college with a 2.9 GPA and thought I would never get into grad school, and here I am in one of the best programs that I think I've ever had the privilege of being in. And so, you know, if I listened to everybody, I wouldn't be where I'm at. And so if you want something or you want to be something or you're not where you want to be right now, it does not mean that it's the end and that you can't obtain it because you can. So I'm just here to say that you can, and that I think everyone here is a resource. I'm also really big into mentoring, so don't ever feel like, you know, I tell this to everyone, don't ever feel like you can't reach out because I have all these like weird titles in front of my name. I'm still just Cecelia, the brown girl that grew up down the street. So
Let's go.
yeah.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, I mean, I think in keeping with the UnconQuerable theme of the show, you know, you just said, right, quick plug. We have to continue to figure out ways to make ourselves as individuals more unconquerable, right? And for me, that's come in the way of putting community first for everything. Yeah. So I never lead with, like, how does this benefit me?
Yes.
Because at the end of the day, it's not going to matter. Like, I'm still going to be eating what I'm eating for lunch or dinner. I'm still going to have a roof over my head, but if you put community first consistently and you're mission focused versus individually driven by accolades or goals, everything will fall into place where it needs to be. But as long as you're putting community first, you will make yourself an unconquerable individual.
Yes, the plug right there.
Why do you keep having me go after him?
Because I'm one more.
He was trying to get you back for earlier.
And now for the RNC.
And now for the knockout. Wow. What's
Dinisha
up?
Mingo.
It's free Mingo.
No, but and I am Dinisha, and I say that strongly because you are you, and you say that with confidence. I don't care what room you're in. I don't care what their status is. I don't care how much money they got. I don't care what their title is. You know that you are you, and that makes you special. And you are powerful. You are strong. And just like Athar, I am big on community. So if you make a meaning, you'll make money. Find meaning, and that's nothing. It's never just about us. It's so much bigger than us. And I say this all the time. I believe one person can change the world. Because if one person can't, 1 million people cannot. And along with what she said, Assemblywoman Cecelia, right? I don't care if it's one instance. I don't care if it's 100 barriers that you have. You can and you will come out of it. Whatever you believe is what you will create. So know that. Statistically speaking, you've been through 100. You've made it through 100% of everything life has thrown at you, and you will continue to be. So be unconquerable.
Yes.
Be the change, and you can reach out to me.
Yes.
And MHF Payroll Services.
With the plug. That's what I'm talking about. So, ladies and gentlemen, oh my God.
I never used to do it. I
You
never
never
used to
used to do that?
self-promote, and I would be on so many things. I'm like, you
Let's
didn't.
unpack that though. That's another episode coming soon.
Coming soon. Right.
Coming soon.
Man, thank y'all so much. Y'all made this episode a lot of fun, man. Like, it was a heavy conversation, but we need, like, because we had these conversations behind closed doors all the time.
Yeah.
And I sat here and was like, man, we don't have a platform where we can actually have these conversations because we're afraid of what may come from it.
Yeah.
Like, and it's like, listen, we have these conversations all the time. Don't act like we don't, people
Right.
out there.
Right.
Don't act like we don't have these
Talk about that
conversations.
Tuesday class
Speak for
conversation.
yourself,
brother.
Yeah.
But I thank you for creating a space, because even as you begin to elevate and move, you got to be more cautious, right?
Yeah.
To a degree
Yeah.
of what you can say openly.
Yeah.
So thank you for allowing the space for it and inviting me.
Of course, man, no problem. Like, because I would never put us in a position where we're gonna dim something. We're literally just asking questions and being like, okay, what we gonna do from here?
Right.
Because we're already doing the work. Like, you're up at the state, you're at the legislative doing the work. You both are. You're here locally, and you go up there too. So it's like, it's not like we're not here doing
Wait, can
the
I make
work.
one more last plug?
Go ahead. What?
Be involved in the legislative process.
Oh,
we want to
please.
hear from you. Call your legislators, look
Please
up policy,
do.
testify.
Please
Make
do.
sure that your voice is heard and that your legislators know that you are not at the table, okay? So that's the last plug I'm going to give you.
Please do, because y'all sit here and wonder why certain things get passed, and you don't get involved.
And that's why they don't. That's what they
That's
don't
why.
want us
Right.
to know about.
Right.
That's what impacts
It's-
our everyday
By the way,
life.
I'll say this: like, no matter how hard folks try, that is the most closed off universe.
Yes,
like,
it is.
even until I got into that industry,
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about the concept of diversity overall.
Right.
The legislature, in my opinion, is pretty diverse. But you go into the lobbyist room. Or one time I was in a hearing, right, and I looked around, 22 people in there, and I was the only minority in
Yep.
there.
That's wild.
Only minority, right? And that's where the money's coming in.
Yeah.
And so, like, at the same time, you see how they throw like false wins at people
Yeah.
to say
Yeah.
like, oh, you know, you're doing this and this and this, and then on the back end they'll siphon the dollars through a different way. So it's
Yep.
a closed off process. We got to continue to figure out ways to get people engaged there too.
Yep,
Yep.
we do.
Get involved, get engaged, y'all. This is episode 3, Systematical Barriers, with my phenomenal guest, my unconquerable guest.
Yes.
We'll catch y'all next time. We out. He's out. Yes. We out.